Hi, everyone, and welcome to the CanadianSME Small Business Podcast. I'm Maheen, and today we're diving into cybersecurity, a very critical topic for small businesses navigating today's digital threats. We're joined by Tony Anscombe, the Global Security Evangelist at ESET, who brings over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy. Tony has been at the forefront of cybersecurity innovations, helping businesses protect their data and stay secure. So let's explore his insights on AI in cybersecurity, the ethical concerns, and practical strategies for businesses. Tony, it's an honor to have you back on the podcast. How have you been?
Oh, I've been well, Maheen, and it's great to be back here.
It will be, definitely. Thank you for joining us again to discuss these critical cybersecurity topics that really affect small and medium-sized businesses across Canada. Now, Tony, things will be a bit different from our last conversation because this time we will be opening our discussion with AI in cybersecurity, because AI is playing a revolutionary role in many fields, and cybersecurity is no exception. And for small businesses, leveraging AI can be a game changer in managing security threats. Tony, can you please explain how ESET incorporates AI into its cybersecurity solutions and how this technology benefits small businesses?
Well, I think there's two parts to that, Mahina, and the reason I say that is we've been using AI in some of our products for actually over 20 years, probably nearer 30 years. And the reason being is if you look back in malware dissemination, distribution, back to the early 2000s, what you'll see, there were large amounts of spikes. So suddenly malware writers became automated, and they started writing an awful lot more malware. And the detection methods used then needed to become behavioral. So early neural networks and early AI or machine learning models were used in the early 2000s as part of the detection engine to detect malware. So we've been using it a long time. However, there's obviously AI, as we're all talking about it today, which has become very prevalent, hasn't it, in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And the reason being is because it's become something we can all use, something you can interact with, and it's something I can interact with, as opposed to it being something an engineer is sitting in a lab somewhere using as a detection tool. So there's the piece in the detection engine that has evolved over 20, 25 years and has improved detections through heuristics, behavioral analytics, etc. And cybersecurity, think about it, generates an awful lot of data.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got the more recent piece of natural language models, so LLMs and NLMs. And what those can do is break down things, and we can ask it questions in natural language, and you can get answers back in natural language as well. So, for example, when we're looking at something like threat intelligence, which has huge amounts of data in it, somebody can suddenly come along to the threat intelligence model and turn and say, hey, what's the difference between this ATP, Advanced Persistent Threat Group, APT group, and what's against this one? Or should I be concerned about threats of this type? And suddenly it will come back and give you a sensible answer that you can understand and digest, even if you're not a security analyst.
That's really insightful, Tony. It's clear how AI adds a powerful layer to security. But could you please share an example of a threat scenario where AI was particularly effective in detection or prevention?
Well, if you think about that scenario, where you may have a threat coming in. So, for example, just say a vulnerability. You have a vulnerability in your environment, and the vulnerability hasn't been exploited in the wild. So, but we see maybe an exploit in the wild start at 8 o'clock in Australia, 8 o'clock in the morning. At some stage, we might see that, and we might determine actually that exploit is then going to end up in your system as you come online at 8 o'clock in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time we've added that into our threat intelligence, that threat intelligence goes through our models and then ends up in the customer system. Yeah, the AI of identity, we use a lot of AI tools in there to, one, identify what type of exploit it was to start with, adding the components so that somebody knows what the indicators of compromise are, and putting that then into the customer system at the other end. So it's all, my point here is it's all hidden from the customer, but there's an awful lot of automated algorithms being used for the detection of the threat, then understanding that you've got that vulnerability at your end, and that you might need to take an automated response to make sure you're blocking that vulnerability or exploit at the other end, because we know you've got that vulnerability because maybe you've got that code as well.
No, truly appreciate it, Tony. It's impressive to see how AI is shaping the future of cybersecurity and really helping small businesses stay secure. And on that note, listeners, cybersecurity is a journey. So please try to stay informed, stay proactive, and remember that a strong security foundation can really protect your business in invaluable ways. Next, Tony, let's delve into the ethical and privacy concerns around AI use in cybersecurity, because with great power comes great responsibility, especially in the realm of AI and cybersecurity. And the ethical and privacy implications of AI are vital concerns. Tony, what are some ethical challenges that come along with using AI in cybersecurity, and how does ESAT really navigate these concerns?
Well, the bit from stopping malicious attacks, I think, has less ethics about it, because if something is malicious, you want it to stop. So it's the ethics around it are not huge. When we talk about ethics in AI, though, there are elements within security and cybersecurity that do draw attention. And one of those, not related to specifically to ESET technology, one of those, though, is facial recognition. Facial recognition is used as a security tool, and it uses AI, of course, to determine whether who is within a picture or what you're actually looking for. The ethics on this are challenging, and the reason I say that is because if you look at, there's obviously bias sometimes within those AI models, and we've seen certain police departments and law enforcement departments turn and say, well, we're not going to use facial recognition because of this. But so the ethical question there is, you want to remove that bias. You don't want to be involved in that bias. However, let me give you an example where the ethic, that while it may be seen as unethical, the Indian government used it about 3 or 4 years ago on a station platform to identify lost children that have been taken from their parents and were being used by crime groups for begging and such like, and selling things on station platforms. They repatriated somewhere around 3,000 children. So the point here is, it's not AI that's unethical. It's the use of AI in certain environments. So if there was a football game or an ice hockey game in Canada and law enforcement were identifying everybody that turned up at the game, I would say that's unethical. If you're repatriating lost children with their parents, it's the same technology, but it's not unethical.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about our use of technology. It's not the technology itself that causes the problem, which is why there needs to be regulation and there needs to be guidance on acceptable use. The society needs to turn around and say, these are the limits of how we want this technology to be used. And of course, those limits need to evolve over time as well, because we might find different ways to use AI, both in security and in society generally.
Mm-hmm. And it's really refreshing to hear about ESET's commitment to ethics and privacy in a field where trust is paramount. Again, thank you, Tony, for highlighting these ethical perspectives. And listeners, embracing AI doesn't really mean compromising on ethics. So please ensure both privacy and security creates a strong foundation of trust with your customers. Tony, now let's address some common misconceptions about AI in cybersecurity, because AI often comes with a set of myths, especially in areas like cybersecurity. So let's clear up some of these, common misconceptions. So yeah, please tell us, what are some of them and that you encounter regarding AI in cybersecurity?
Well, one of the things we often hear is people turn and ask the question of, are the bad guys using AI?
Mhm.
And the answer is yes. And the reason I highlight this is because that answer is both correct and incorrect at the same time. So it's a bit of one of those misconceptions. And the reason I say that is, are cyber criminals using AI tools? Yeah, they're using them probably in the same way that you and I may be doing. So they're correcting the grammar in emails they send, in scam emails and such like. They may be using some AI tool sets within the creation of malware or within the creation of their attack. What they're not doing is, we're not seeing AI generated attacks, which I think is the
Mhm.
fear that most people actually have, or some people believe is happening. So there's no automated system they're creating and generating these attacks behind people. You know, and I think, will it come at some stage? Yeah, maybe, because yeah, in the same way cyber defenders evolve the technology, cyber criminals will also evolve the technology. However, do I think there's a huge motivation of cyber criminals to go in this direction today? The answer is no, I don't think there is, because there's too many easy access points. If you look at, for example, RDP, or people that don't put multi-factor authentication on, or the human element of stealing credentials and social engineering and such like, I think there's too much low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals to go at. So they don't need to develop those sophisticated tools.
Mhm. I think,
But I'm sure we will see it at some stage.
of course, no, you're right. With a clearer understanding, businesses can approach AI in cybersecurity more effectively. Not only, let's look at some key trends that small businesses should watch for in cybersecurity, because cyber threats, they're constantly evolving, and businesses must adapt to stay protected. And staying aware of current trends is crucial for long-term security. So, Tony, what trends do you see shaping the future of cybersecurity, especially for small and medium-sized businesses?
So one of the things that small businesses need to take into account is the fact the threat has changed. If we go back 3 to 5 years, malware would have infected a device. It would have landed in your inbox through email, or it would have been introduced somehow into your network, and you'd have had some sort of cyber attack and creating a cyber incident. Today, that's very different. So cyber criminals will look to exploit a vulnerability. They will gain access to a network. They may well stay in that network for a period of time, look for the things that in a small business, like data, customer data, or the crown jewels, so to speak, the things that are important to that business. And then they might launch their cyber attack. So the difference is, at one stage you could identify it because there was malicious code. Now it's about working out whether somebody's actually in your network. They may not have actually deployed any malicious code at that stage. They may be putting a second route into the network. So if you do detect one, they'll use the other, etc. So the tool sets have changed. So small businesses need to adapt and protect against that as well. And you'll hear the term EDR or MDR, or in fact XDR, used a lot. And small businesses need to adopt that type of technology. And what that means is, EDR is endpoint detection and response. XDR is kind of broadens that out to other devices. And MDR is managed detection and response. Now, for a small business, I would look at managed detection and response. That's where, in effect, everything that happens on your network is then looked at by a system using AI models that sorts through all that data, looks at the processes running, the traffic running, and looks for anomalies. So if suddenly some device in your network starts talking to some weird server somewhere that doesn't make sense, you want that highlighted within that system and investigated, and where appropriate, responded to. So for example, on a Saturday morning, if some cyber criminal manages to break credentials on a device, access the network, and starts routing around the network looking for your data, that would be unexplained activity. You want that machine isolated. You want it isolated quickly so that they can't go any further. Yeah, and that's the type of tools you need to be using. Now, for a small business, that's really complex. Yeah, it needs to be 24/7. So that's why I'd recommend actually all small businesses look at managed detection and response.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really reassuring to know about these developments and how they're really setting the stage for future security practices. But how can small businesses best stay updated on these trends and integrate them into their security practices, Tony?
Well, one of the things is, if for the trends, it's just keeping abreast of what is active in the market. And one of the areas that I think is really interesting is cyber insurance. A lot of businesses take insurance against cyber incidents. Even if you're a business that don't go down this path, insurers are really good at understanding risk, because they don't want to pay out a claim. But they're also really good at understanding what reduces their risk. So for me, I'd actually watch what cyber insurers are saying and what technologies they're recommending. So if you currently look, a cyber insurer will turn around and say you need to have multi-factor authentication, you need to have EDR, you need to have a good quality backup and restore policy and system. I would watch those trends that cyber insurers, because they're looking at risk and they're looking at reducing the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a factual data process from their perspective. So I would watch that trend with them on what to deploy and how to when to deploy it. Other trends in the market. Well, unfortunately, ransomware still is a trend as a cybersecurity threat. The other one I would add in there is business email compromise. Seems to be becoming more and more common. And in fact, in the US, that's the number one reported fraud to the FBI is business email compromise. And that's where somebody impersonates somebody else in the organization to ask for a financial transaction. For me, this is a non-technology solution. If somebody's asking for a wire transfer and they're not an existing vendor, or they're asking to change the account details, that should be a manual verification. I should bring you up, Maheen, and say, is that transaction true? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not take the impersonation. I think there should be a human verification.
No, thank you, Tony, for these valuable insights into the latest cybersecurity trends. I mean, small businesses must stay ahead of these developments, and those ways were very practical. Now, let's take our shift and focus on different steps that small businesses can take to strengthen their cybersecurity foundations, because cybersecurity at the end of the day doesn't have to be overwhelming, because taking manageable steps can make a world of difference for small businesses. So, Tony, on that note, what practical steps would you recommend to small businesses that are just beginning to strengthen their cybersecurity?
Well, one of the big things is to understand all the assets that you actually have within a business. So actually step back and look at the assets, one that you have that need protecting, but also understand what's important. Where is your customer data within the business? What type of customer data is it? Who has access to that customer data? In fact, that's one of the things I think a small business sometimes fails to understand. A new employee joins, it's like, just give them access to everything. It's easier. Understand you want to limit the access. So only somebody working in the ordering department needs to see the ordering system. Certain people only need to see certain pieces of data. So understand what you need to protect and then look at the best ways of protecting it. And within that, follow a cybersecurity framework. Now, that might sound rather onerous from a small business perspective. Somebody like NIST in the US publishes a cybersecurity framework. There is a long form for large enterprises to follow. They also do some really good tools for small and medium businesses. And those tools are, in effect, a subset of that long form. And following that framework will allow a company to identify the assets, how to protect them, and in effect, give them a checklist to go down and actually make sure they've got the right protections in place. So for me, a cybersecurity framework and a formal policy for cybersecurity is essential, and it needs to come from top down. The boss needs to be brought in, and it needs to come from all the way from the board of the company down through the CEO, the managing director, all the way down into the employees. It can't be something generated from the cybersecurity team or IT team. It needs to be, the entire business needs to be thinking about security within its business.
Thanks, Tony, for these hands on recommendations. It's really encouraging for businesses to know that they can start small but still make a big impact. And listeners, please remember that every small step in cybersecurity, it really adds up. So keep building and stay informed to strengthen your business's defenses. Now, Tony, before we close and let you go, what's that one final piece of advice that you would like to give to small business owners that are looking to improve their cybersecurity posture?
Well, actually, there's two things I'd like to highlight. One, I mentioned EDR earlier on. Make sure you're looking at those advanced technologies because cybercrime has changed. It has become far more complex and sophisticated. So make sure that you're looking at those advanced technologies. The other one is, I think I mentioned earlier on RDP and multi-factor authentication. One of the most common ways that we see cyber criminals attack a company is through a lack of deployment of multi-factor authentication. This is one of the easiest things any company can turn on. Yes, it's slightly more painful when somebody connects that they've got to then authenticate themselves, but it's also the biggest thing that will stop somebody accessing a cybercriminal accessing a broken account or a compromised account. So please turn on multi-factor authentication whenever you've got somebody connecting remotely, whether they're using their own device, a company device, or whether they can be on public Wi-Fi, they could be at home. Make sure you're strongly authenticating them. I can't express that enough that it's an easy win for companies, especially small businesses.
Thank you, Tony, for sharing your expertise and practical advice with us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and we look forward to having one in the future.
Oh, my pleasure, Mahina. Anytime.
And that was the end of our discussion with Tony Anscombe. Again, thank you for our listeners as well for tuning in. Today, we explored AI's role in cybersecurity, really touched on some ethics, debunked myths, and shared practical steps for small businesses to stay secure. We hope these insights support your cybersecurity journey. A special thanks to our partners, RBC, UPS, Constant Contact, IAG, and Google for their support in making this podcast possible and empowering small businesses across Canada. For more expert advice, please visit CanadianSME.ca to subscribe to the magazine. See you next time on the podcast with more insightful conversations. Thank you.